So I suppose first things first, tell me, I don't necessarily even know your story in terms of how it started for you at HobbyTown. When did you start? And how did you get started working at HobbyTown?
Well, if you want to go back to the
I
original
do.
part,
I do.
it would have been about fall of 79. Merle needed somebody to work at Great Race and Hobby Place during the day, and I didn't find a teaching job that I wanted, so I was doing some substitute teaching, so I decided, well, I'll do that and fill in some time. So I was working with them through, and then on May 1st, 1980, when Merle and Tom officially took over HobbyTown downtown, that's when I started officially working for HobbyTown. At that point, I was normally working the days downtown with Merle. And a lot of times I would then hop in my car, drive out to Great Race, which was in Bethany, and then work some of the evening hours out over there. So that was how I kind of got into this whole mess. And I never did find a teaching spot that I really wanted. So, and they had to put up with me.
So I didn't know that actually that you started at Great Race. So
Yeah.
once the whole like purchase of Hobbytown happened, and then they moved from Bethany to East Park and changed it, and opened up Hobbytown. Were you still splitting back and forth between downtown and East Park? Or?
At that point, I started working exclusive. Tom had to put up with me out at East Park. So I was working exclusively at East Park, and I believe they had Mike Reagan and or Hodge, maybe both of them, downtown with Merle. So, but yeah, no, I was exclusively over at East Park, after they moved out to East Park.
How long did you work at East Park in the store before transitioning? Like when the corporate office started, or how did that?
You're going to make me think back then. I'm trying to think when they started doing the corporate. Probably early 1990s, I think, would have been about the time I started working then at corporate. And at that point, then I was doing, besides putting stuff in the database on the games and that, I was ordering gaming product in that for the franchisees, new franchises, opening orders. And I was then also then training the new franchise owners.
I unearthed a super old video of you like it was a training video, and you and Merle did it, and it's like 3.5 hours long, and you guys talking about all the different categories, but you spent a lot of time talking about models and games and that sort of stuff. What were some of the like product categories that you really were passionate about?
Well, stuff I was really into was the games and that, but as far as doing the videos and that, Mike Reagan, which we always affectionately called the model doctor, didn't want to be seen on video. He was afraid of being filmed. So I had to do the models, and I knew enough about models to get by. I mean, if you wanted to ask me something technical, we were in trouble. And I could kind of do the same thing when it came to trains. I knew the basics of trains and that, but I was not a serious train enthusiast by any means. So, but games specifically was my kind of passion, the hobby thing, and historical miniatures, since I was supposed to be a social studies teacher, history teacher, and that's where it all kind of came in at.
All the historical miniatures.
Yep.
Let's go all the way back to both to East Park. How did that store feel back in the early 80s in terms of how did it sound inside the mall? How did it feel when customers would come in? What was the dynamic and the general feel of things back then?
Well, the store originally was only about 1,000 square feet, if I have that down right. And we were down at the south end of the strip of the inside mall. So there's DeCosta's on one side of us, DeCosta's Sporting Goods, and there's Cliff's Smoke Shop that was on the other side of us. And then across the hall was, I want to say it was Landon's Men's Sportingswear. So we were in the men's section. So we didn't have as much traffic per se as if you were up at the north end where there was the movie theater, the food court, and all the women's stuff. But we had a decent, vibe, and it was kind of a nice little intimate thing. I mean, we had people that would come out to East Park instead of going downtown. And they did it because they claimed because Tom and I were nicer. So we were willing to talk to them. We didn't have to see $1 in their hand before we would have socialized with them. But it was a good time. We had the same, a lot of the same regulars from Great Race that had functioned on over. We did have, some new customers, of course, anytime you changed. But it was a nice appeal, to it.
Back before Tom created the point of sale system, ordering was probably a little bit more laborious. Walk me through how you would do ordering and inventory and how that worked back in the day before computers were really implemented.
Every Saturday morning when I was working, I would go through and hand inventory all the miniatures on the wall. And I wrote down the part numbers of them and then how many in that, so I could see what we were missing and what was necessary needed to get replaced. Because especially when it came to the fantasy miniatures, there was some that would be selling at a constant rate. Normally we only had 1 or 2 at a time. So that was what I spent a good part of Saturday morning when it was quiet in between customers doing. Board games, and that was a lot easier to figure out, and and role-playing games was a little bit easier, but again, you still had to flip through the containers that we had where the modules and all that were in to see what we had and what we needed to do. So it would take a few hours, but it was fun. And then, you'd write it down, write up an order on a sheet of paper, and then you'd wait till Monday. Oh, and you'd also check your special order box to see what special orders people had wanted. So then come Monday morning, we normally got a call from the distributors. And we'd get a call from Joyce Boyle at Greenfield Hobbies, and she'd call up and want to know, and I'd read her off what I was needing, and then I'd ask her what was new, and she would tell me what they had new, and I'd decide what I wanted. And what was always nice with Joyce is you knew she wasn't purposely going to sell you anything bad, because sometimes she'd say, "Yeah, we got this in. I don't know why the buyers bought it, but we've got it." I said, "Okay, if you don't like it, we're going to pass." And then we just rotated on. And then, we had no idea what we were going to be getting till that Thursday or Friday when the order showed up. Well, then later in the day, I would either call or I'd get a call from, it was called the Armory at the time, later became Alliance Distributing, and Bill Myers. And it was one of the nice things that you develop a rapport with the sales reps. And in the case of Joyce Boyle, she was also the owner of Greenfield Hobbies. And Bill and we would sit there telling me what we needed, what he had, and that, and do the special orders. And what we'd do is we'd rotate. If we had stuff that we had not gotten fulfilled from Greenfield, we would put it on the Armory order. So it was the following week that we would then be ordering it from them. And back then it was, the customers were much more understanding that, okay, it could be a few weeks before you get it because we don't know what we're getting till it actually shows up. And then Douglas Models out of Denver, they would call, Jerry, I believe his name was, would call us in the afternoon. And we'd give them the model order, which Mike had written up, and then also any train supplies and that type of stuff. Because at that time, we didn't have radio control out at East Park. So it was trains, games, models, paints, some what we'd call now 900 stuff, rockets and that. But we didn't really get into any of the radio control stuff. But so that was how that all worked out. And then, of course, Thursday or Friday when the orders showed up, we would check them in. And that was just see the invoice, Okay, that is okay. We mark it off. It doesn't go into anything, because we're just using a simple cash register till to ring up the price and that. And then we had to just rotate and do the whole thing over the following week, every week. And from what I understand, is that when I went on my 3-week vacation to Africa and Tom had to do the miniatures, Mary told me later, says, he didn't realize how difficult it was to do that. It's like, yeah.
That was probably what spurred me. He was like, I'm going to create a computer system that's
Yeah.
going to fix this.
So that was really kind of the process that we did.
Crazy. You were there when HobbyTown started franchising.
Yep.
What was the feeling in the store at the time? What was the vibe? Were you guys excited? Were you trepidatious? Were there concerns, or was there just a lot of enthusiasm?
I guess for me, there wasn't really anything anyway, one way or the other. I mean, it was something, okay, they're doing this, and these people are going out there to open their stores. In the case of like Todd Noble that opened up the first one in Colorado Springs, I don't even know if I met him.
Okay.
Or had really anything to do with the ordering of the product for his store. So we didn't really have any feedback with especially any of the really early ones and that. So especially like Dennis Crippen, they had been race enthusiasts up at Omaha store, and they just went down to Arizona and opened up a store.
Do you ever remember there being, so obviously over the course of the amount of time that you've been at Hobbytown, there's ups and downs. Is there any particular period of time that you remember there being more challenges than normal, or it maybe was more stressful than normal, or there were something happened which really caused a fair amount of turmoil that you guys overcame?
I know there for a while in the early mid 80s, when the economy wasn't doing well, there wasn't nearly as many customers per se coming in. So it was a bit slower and that. So that was always kind of, okay, how's this going to play out? And they always kind of worked it out that, us guys that were making hourly wages were putting in the hours. So like Tom was working from home more, Merle was doing something from his home. So, people like Hodge or Mike Reagan or myself or whatever were the ones that was then running the store and that having to deal with the stuff. That was probably really kind of the big deal back then. And then when the economy came back, it was like, okay, we're back doing all right.
I found some like advertisements that it would have, and this was after Sutter Place opened, but it would have Merle's Hobbytown and it would have one address, and then it would have Tom's Hobbytown was a different address, and then Gary's Hobbytown at East Park. I'll share those with you. Do you remember how that came about?
No, I didn't even remember that my name was on it.
I have those. I'll share it with you along with the training video. But
Yeah.
were you just the general manager during?
I was just the normal employee that was there most of the time. So they didn't give me any elite title. They were afraid it was going to go to my head.
You've been retired now for a couple of years from Hobbytown.
Yep.
Is there a feeling that you have when you either drive by Hobbytown, or maybe you might see a commercial or something that still evokes your memories from either current or corporate or back in the old East Park days? How do you feel when you see that?
Well, every once in a while, though I'm finding it's harder and harder to do it, is I kind of like going back into the corporate office and seeing some of my former employees, staff, that I worked with for so many years. That's kind of getting harder and harder to do. But that's one of the big things. And then I kind of just miss some of the customers. When I see some of the old customers, and that's always kind of like a reunion, almost like going to a high school reunion. When you see the guys and you get to talk and reminisce about whatever they were doing, or what they were interested in, and how they are doing now. I just remember when I was training, I wouldn't be in the store except for when I was training as store owners, and I'd be out there. I had this one customer come running up to me and call me by name and ask me how I was doing. And I was flabbergasted, because when I was in the store all the time, he would come in, never say a word. I'd say, "Hi, how are you?" I can, and then he'd be off and gone. It's like, okay. And then all of a sudden I came in and was doing training, and he was just so excited to see me. So that's kind of what I kind of miss. I kind of, miss that aspect, and now the aspect of just seeing all the people, because 99.9% of your customers were great. I mean, they were just wonderful to have around and to have in your store, and that, you take a few minutes, you socialize with them, and they appreciate it, and you just go on about your day. So, but seeing the sign, your sign is so far back off the road, I don't see you unless I'm purposely going out there anyway. So, but I will say it's amazing, just how different the store is now compared to what it was back then.
Talk to me about that a little bit. What are some of the differences that you perceive that how things have changed, in 45 years,
Well, when we moved the store out to East Park, we had 1,000 square feet. We had no game room. We had no back room. So any sort of gaming that we were attempted to do, we'd either do it out in the hallway, which some guys didn't like to do, or we might go have it down at the food court and that. But that kind of went away after a short period of time, where now you guys have that pretty much dedicated game room area for people to be playing, and that, which is great, and it really encourages a lot of sales. I mean, Great Race, when I got involved in Great Race, they had basically a kind of two game rooms, a small one for like role-playing games and a larger one for board games. And they had a schedule. The first Saturday of every month, it was like micro armor for World War II. Then it was 15 millimeter ancients. Then it was micro armor for modern armor. And then it was 25 millimeter ancients. So there was something different going on every Saturday as far as a historical miniature thing that people could come in, and we would have a lot of that's how we got a lot of people into it. They would come in, look in there, and kind of, which is what they did to me. I walked by some guys playing historical miniatures one night, ancients, and I kind of looked in there, and my mouth fell open, and that because I had seen it in a book in a library, and I thought, well, I'd have to go to Chicago or Denver to see this stuff. And it was Merle and another gentleman by the name of John Gleason playing 25 millimeter ancients. And I just gawked at it, and they said, I go, yeah, it'd be neat. I said, well, why don't you come back next week? We'll let you run some stuff. Okay. Well, I ran some stuff, and then shortly thereafter, I started building an army. And then I built a second army. And then I built a third army. And then I got into 15 millimeter Civil War. It's like, it was addicting. And being a history buff, it gave me an excuse then to be buying the books, on Carthage or the Celts or the Vikings or whatever, to study up and learn more about that time period and that. So, that type of stuff, we went from having that to not having really any gaming at HobbyTown in East Park, to then over time, seeing, the stores, having the big game rooms back again. and that, which is, I always kind of like, because I was a gamer, I could care less about radio control, you know.
What is maybe like some long-term habits or skills that you've picked up from working at Hobbytown, especially in the store, that has really carried you through both working then at the home office and also just in your personal life? Is there anything that comes to mind in terms of things that you've gathered from being in that type of environment?
I don't think there's anything that really comes to mind. I mean, it did keep my math skills up to par. I can count back change, or figure out the change that I need to have, be getting in that very easily, where I see kids today, they're struggling to figure out how much change they should be giving me back, from what I give them. And what's worse, they don't know the coins. It's like, really? Instead of giving me 5 dimes, you could give me 2 quarters, you know.
Not a lot of cash transactions these days.
Yeah, but still, you need to know it.
I hear you there. And that's really all I have for you, Gary. I just kind of wanted to reminisce a little bit about, the old days.
Mhm.
Is there anything that I missed a little bit? I have pictures of some gaming conventions that would happen either at UNL, or there's one that appears to be in the basement of maybe the Gateway Mall.
Yeah,
And I have
we
no idea about those. I have no documentation or anything. So I
yeah,
don't really know. How did that all?
yeah, we had a couple of game conventions in the bottom of the Gateway Mall. And again, they are mostly historical miniatures with some Dungeons and Dragons or Traveler science fiction role playing stuff. But we would have ancients tournaments, which was the best, easiest setup, because the rules were designed for tournaments. And then you would also have people making up Napoleonics and figuring out point values for stuff on that. And they did a few other things along there. Fantasy was not big back then. There was not a good set of miniature rules for fantasy or science fiction, and that everything was historically oriented, and that it wasn't till probably the mid 80s before fantasy and science fiction had miniature rules designed for them that was popular enough. And then we did have at least one, maybe 2 over at down on campus, and Merle managed to get Duke Siegfried to show up, and he was a legend in the historical miniature gaming community. And he was this guy that would build his own diorama game platform, and he built different ones. If he was doing something with the French Foreign Legion, he had built a desert complex with the forts and everything. Whatever it was, he had it. I saw I think last year I went to Gamma out in Las Vegas. He had a big room they set aside for him, and he brought in every game board that he had designed, and with the painted miniatures. And there had to be about 8 or 9 of them that he had there, and it was Civil War, Lord of the Rings, you name it, he had it. And it's just like, my God, the time that he spent, building, erecting that so that he could go to a convention and put on a game demonstration is just amazing. And he was the nicest guy you'd ever met. I mean, when I met him, when I saw him out in Gamma, it would have been probably close to 20 years after he was here in Lincoln. And I just mentioned who I was and that I was with, Hobbytown Lincoln. Oh yeah, I remember. And he started reminiscing about, being there for the convention and his display and everything. It's like, yeah, you don't forget a thing, do you?
It's kind of hard for, kids today or even modern gaming type of people to understand that back then, 40 years ago, playing a game was it was unusual. There were
Mhm.
not a lot of places that you could play these sorts of
Right.
games, let alone a game convention that Hobbytown would put on. So then when you have a celebrity of his type that would show up and demonstrate a game that you would never get the opportunity
Mhm.
to ever again was kind of a cool thing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, he had been, besides doing those, he had been the owner of a, miniature manufacturing company for historical and some fantasy and that type of stuff. So he was well known in the industry. So that was made it kind of really neat to see, and it just was kind of interesting. I always wanted to go to some of the bigger conventions and that because they had people coming in from England, and that was kind of like the legends of different stuff.
What is your favorite hobby that Hobbytown always sold?
Well, of course, games. I really like the historical miniatures. I'll still play those whenever I can get a chance. But nowadays, I do a lot of board gaming and that, and stuff like the railroad games by Mayfair, which is now no longer around. British Rails, Empire Builder, etc. And that. I just like playing games and getting together with people, because it's kind of a social event. So you're sitting around either at a table or across the table from each other while you're playing the game. You're socializing, chatting, seeing what's going on with everybody. It's gaming over anything else. Most of the hobby industry is more solitaire. Model building, model railroading, even to a large degree, radio control is pretty solitaire. And gaming by its nature is more social, and they used to say, I always used to explain to some people there's two types of hobbyists. There's your traditional hobbyists, which are your model builders, your railroaders, and your RC guys, which are building stuff. They like the whole part of the hobby is building it. And then you have what in theory is a newer hobby, which are the gamers. For the most part, they just like playing the stuff. They like getting out there, socializing with each other, figuring out the problem that's being given to them by their opponent, and understanding the rules. Now, in the miniature gaming, you do, in most cases, you do have to do some building of assembling pieces or painting them and that, because at the time, if you're doing historical miniatures, they wouldn't let you bring an unpainted miniature onto the game table. Now the guys that do the fantasy and science fiction, they're a lot more lenient about it. But I couldn't bring my own, Carthaginian army out onto the table until I had it all painted and ready to go. So I'd start out with the basic point values, and then we kept adding more options to that army. So, but that's the thing.